In April 1815, a mountain you had never heard of killed more people than any natural disaster in recorded human history. It didn't kill them with lava. It didn't kill them with ash. It killed them with what came after: a year of stolen sunlight, collapsed harvests, and a cold so relentless that farmers in New England planted their crops 3 times and watched them die 3 times. The mountain was Mount Tambora, and what it did to the world is still shaping the way you understand climate today. You probably know about Krakatoa, you've heard about Pompeii, but Tambora was larger than both combined, and yet most people have never heard its name. Why? Because its most devastating weapon was invisible. It wasn't rock or fire, it was gas. Sulfur dioxide shot so high into the atmosphere that it wrapped the entire planet in a reflective haze and turned the following year into something that had never been given a name before: the year without a summer. Let's go back to the moment it began. The island of Sumbawa sits in what is now Indonesia, a few degrees south of the equator. In the years leading up to 1815, locals on the island had watched Mount Tambora slowly swell. Tremors rattled the ground. Strange sounds echoed from the mountain's upper slopes. A growing unease spread through the communities at its base. Then, on April 5th, 1815, the first major explosions began. People on nearby islands reported hearing cannon fire. Ships changed course, convinced there was a naval battle somewhere on the horizon. There was no battle. There was only the mountain. What happened next was unlike anything in modern human memory. On the night of April 10th, the eruption reached its climax. Volcanologist Clive Oppenheimer, in his landmark study of catastrophic eruptions, describes what followed as one of the most violent geological events of the past 10,000 years. The mountain's summit collapsed inward. A column of ash and gas punched 43 kilometers into the stratosphere, nearly twice the cruising altitude of a commercial aircraft. 3 separate pyroclastic flows, superheated avalanches of gas and pulverized rock traveling at over 500 kilometers per hour, reached the sea within minutes, destroying everything in their path. The island was plunged into 3 days of total darkness. Not dim light, not overcast skies. Complete absolute darkness in the middle of the day. Approximately 71,000 people died in the immediate aftermath. Ash buried villages, meters deep. The Tambora people and their entire language were erased from the earth. Not diminished, gone completely in a matter of days. But the mountain was only getting started. Here is the mechanism you need to understand. When Tambora erupted, it released an estimated 60 teragrams of sulfur dioxide directly into the stratosphere. That is an almost incomprehensible quantity. Historian and environmental scholar Gillan Darcy Wood, whose work on Tambora's global consequences remains one of the most comprehensive accounts ever assembled, explains that at stratospheric altitudes sulfur dioxide reacts with water vapor to form microscopic droplets of sulfuric acid. These droplets are far too small to fall as rain. Instead, they form a persistent aerosol layer that acts like a one-way mirror for the sun. Sunlight bounces off. Heat that was meant to reach the Earth's surface never arrives. And that layer, invisible, odorless, undetectable without instruments, began drifting westward across the globe within weeks of the eruption. By early 1816, it had spread across the entire northern hemisphere. Imagine you are living in New England in the spring of that year. You have planted your crops. The snow has finally melted. The skies look completely normal. Then June arrives, and it snows. Not a light dusting, actual snowfall. In June, across Massachusetts and Vermont and New Hampshire, temperatures in parts of New England dropped below freezing in the middle of summer. Crops froze in the ground. Farmers planted again. The crops froze again. A third planting, a third failure. The price of grain tripled in a matter of months. Livestock starved. Hunger spread through communities that had never known true famine. In some townships, residents simply abandoned their homes and left. Entire villages were evacuated as families moved west, searching for land that might still be warm enough to grow something. This migration shaped the settlement of the American Midwest in ways that historians have only recently begun to fully trace. Do you understand what that kind of desperation does to a society? Across the Atlantic, it was worse. Europe had already been ground down by more than 2 decades of Napoleonic war. The continent was exhausted, its infrastructure damaged, its farmland depleted. When 1816 arrived with its endless cold rain, its grey and sunless weeks, its flooded fields and rotting crops, it was a blow the continent could barely absorb. Famine swept through France, Switzerland, and Germany. Riots broke out in grain markets. Typhus, thriving in the cold and the hunger and the mass displacement, killed hundreds of thousands more. In Ireland, crop failures struck decades before the more famous famine, the same climate disruption already rehearsing the catastrophe. In China and India, rice harvests failed across vast regions as the monsoon system buckled under the altered atmospheric conditions. Historian John D. Post, whose landmark study of the 1816 crisis documented the full scale of the global collapse, estimated that the cumulative death toll from famine, disease, and social unrest in the years following Tambora may have exceeded 1 million people. One volcano, one eruption, 1 year of stolen summer, 1 million deaths spread across the world. And then there is the story you might not have heard at all. In June of 1816, 5 people rented a villa on the shores of Lake Geneva in Switzerland. The summer was supposed to be warm. There were plans for gardens, boat trips, long evenings outdoors. Instead, it rained. It rained nearly every day, week after week, the cold pressing in through the windows, the skies permanently grey, the lake churning under unrelenting storms. The 5 people were Lord Byron, Percy Bysshe Shelley, the physician John Polidori, Claire Clairmont, and an 18-year-old named Mary Godwin, who would later become Mary Shelley. Trapped indoors by the strange and endless cold, Byron proposed a challenge. Each of them would write a ghost story. Mary had been struggling to come up with something. Then one night, she described lying half awake and seeing behind her closed eyes a vivid and terrifying image. A pale scientist, a creature assembled from dead parts, awakening at the very moment its creator recoiled in horror. She stayed up the rest of the night and wrote the opening of what would become Frankenstein. Polidori, listening to Byron's own abandoned fragment about a nobleman with an unnatural hold on life, transformed it into a story of his own. The Vampire, the first modern vampire story in the English language. The year without a summer did not just kill crops, it created monsters. Modern climate science has returned to Tambora not as history, but as data. Researchers analysing polar ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica found a sharp sulfate spike from 1815 that matches almost exactly with the subsequent cooling signal preserved in tree ring records across the northern hemisphere. Volcanologist Michael Rampino has used the Tambora event as a reference calibration point for understanding how volcanic forcing interacts with pre-existing climate conditions. Because what happened in 1816 revealed something critical that scientists are still citing today. Even a temporary regional cooling of half a degree to a full degree Celsius was enough to collapse agricultural systems, trigger cascading famine, accelerate the spread of disease, and destabilize governments a fraction of a degree. That was all it took. Think about what that means. The world you live in is built on a set of quiet assumptions. That summer will follow spring, that crops will grow in their season, that harvests will come. Entire economies are planned around it. Entire civilizations are stacked on top of it. And in 1816, a single geological event, 3 hours of peak eruption on one island in Indonesia on one April night, reached into the lives of people on every continent and removed those assumptions entirely. Not for a century, not for a decade, for 1 year. 1 year was enough to break supply chains, empty villages, rewrite literature, redirect migrations, and set in motion social pressures that would ultimately contribute to revolutions across Europe in the decades that followed. What does it mean that a single mountain can silence summer for an entire planet? Gillen Darcy Wood has called Tambora the most consequential environmental event of the 19th century. He is not wrong. It remapped migration patterns across North America. It pushed European social order to the breaking point. It gave literature 2 of its most enduring archetypes. And it did all of this quietly, invisibly, through an aerosol veil that no one at the time could see or measure or name, through a silence that arrived precisely where the summer should have been. In April 1815, a mountain you had never heard of killed more people than any natural disaster in recorded human history. But the mountain didn't stop there. It reached through the atmosphere and into the pages of literature, into the grain markets of 3 continents, into the bones of children who starved that winter, into the polar ice, where scientists can still read its signature 200 years later. The mountain has been quiet for a long time now. The aerosols settled. The summers came back. But the lesson Tambora left inside the ice and the tree rings and the pages of Frankenstein has never stopped arriving. And it has never once stopped being relevant.